Right, so welcome to all of those who have joined us today, and thank you for joining us. This topic that we've picked for our mini masterclass today is really around we kind of decided well-being and resilience for women in business. It's not necessarily only aimed at women, because I think what we're going to be covering today is really, it can be across the board for men, for women, for anyone really in an important leadership role, whether that's leading your family, whether that's leading a business, whether that's leading a political party, whatever it is, it can stretch across the board. What we thought was really interesting, though, specifically as a woman in business, as all women in business ourselves, is this is an interesting topic to explore. And in working with some of the frameworks that Jackie, who is our main speaker today, will present, hopefully it will give you some really useful tools to take away with you wherever you go or wherever you need it, because it's the kind of framework that really can be kind of shared and implemented no matter what the situation is. So we've got men on this group, that's great. Women, we've got mothers, that's great. This is mixed for whoever really needs to hear what they need to hear today. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Candace Schulman, and I'm the founder of HR 360, which is it's a leadership and human capital people consultancy, really aimed at helping all small to medium-sized businesses with growing and scaling challenges from a people perspective. Towards the end of last year, I brought Jackie Meyersfeld on board. She's an organizational development consultant, so she's been doing that for the last sort of 20 years, and really extensive experience in the corporate world and working with a lot of private equity businesses and running group processes and executive coaching sessions for a lot of leaders in business. And what she brings with her is a huge wealth of experience and insight and knowledge from a leadership perspective. So what I really wanted for Jackie to cover today, and she's brought with her such incredible frameworks that when she shares some of the little nuggets, the golden nuggets that she's got with her today, we can at least share it with our network and our connections, which is why, it's so important that we start having these more regularly, because these nuggets have to be shared. I think in a world that is hugely volatile these days, with huge economic upheavals and geopolitical, conflicts and issues, and even at a micro level, leaders in business and what they're experiencing, and for all of us, the different generations moving into the workplace and how we navigate those challenges. I think this can really be, like I said to you, across the board, a framework that people can take with them and take golden nuggets with them. So what we'll be doing today is really presenting to you some of those tips, strategies, insights. I like to call them golden nuggets, because we'll be presenting that to you in the form of a framework that Jackie will slowly get into. I'm going to give Jackie, because we've only got an hour today, so how we'll run this is what I would suggest and encourage is any questions that you've got, we can say that towards the end. We'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A after Jackie has spoken. And Jackie, what you can do is maybe just speak for the next sort of 35 minutes or so until 10:15, and share whatever you need to share on your insights with whoever's joined. And then any questions we really welcome. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end. The other thing I wanted to say to you is this masterclass today, we call it a mini masterclass because we do run masterclass sessions for leaders across the board throughout the year. And obviously those are much more packed with a lot more insights that businesses want their leaders to go on. And this one is free purely because it's like I said, it's nuggets that we want to share with people to take away with them. But what we'll also be doing is really discussing the outline of what that leadership masterclass looks like towards the end of Jackie's talking, so that you can get a better understanding of it and see whether that is actually something that maybe you want to explore in your own right. So that's really how the agenda will go this morning. And so I encourage you, any questions you've got, to make use of the chat facility. If you want to put them down as Jackie's speaking and something comes up, please make use of the chat facility. And then Nicole will facilitate that after Jackie has finished. And we can maybe hopefully go into some form of discussion with you about any of the questions that you've got. All right. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Jackie, who will really, I think, just give us a spin on. So like I said, it's not necessarily purely just for women, but I think anyone who is running a business, anyone who has a leadership role in a business, anybody who's experiencing the complexities of work-life balance as a leader or as a parent or as a carer, this is for you. And it talks about this really important tool called resilience that is a leadership tool, and the well-being element, which again we're all sort of needing to make sure we integrate into our daily lives. So Jackie will provide a really, really good spin on that for you all. So thank you for joining us, Jackie. And I'm going to what I'll do is I'll put the next slide on, and all your talking points are there, and you can go ahead.
Thanks, Candice. Hey, everyone. So welcome and thank you for joining us. So many things went through my mind as Candice was giving the introduction. As she said, I won't give my age away. There's a woman thing. This has been something that has been ongoing in my life for many years. I think it's probably going on to 23, 24 years now. And navigating the space inside organizations as an employee, as well as a consultant outside of organizations, which I embarked on in 2011, running my own consultancy. And so the picture is quite broad, and it isn't just limited to the financial services arena that I spend so much time in, both in and out of the organization, but as Candice mentioned, also from a private equity perspective, going to so many different spaces because of portfolio companies and businesses that these private equity firms had acquired. And so there is a breadth of knowledge and experience working across so many dimensions and so many industries and so many groups of individuals. I think the most important thing I want you to hold, and I have no doubt that there might be nodding of heads, is that this world that we work in has transformed and changed so fundamentally since 2020 when COVID hit. I mean, I think it was always going in that direction. So let's not say that it was going to go in the direction that it's gone. But I think when the coronavirus hit the world and shut it down, making people leave their organizations, go home, work remotely, work in an infinitely different way to traditional, more 20th century management work experiences, it kind of propelled us at rocket launch speed into this new stratosphere of the 21st century. And that is the focus of what I work with in my leadership work and a lot of the coaching, because it doesn't feel like it's a predictable space. And I would really like to encourage you to hold an insight or hold a question, like Candice said, for the end, because I know and I can own my own feeling about the world that we're living in. It feels very fast. It feels very unpredictable. It feels very unknown. It feels very overwhelming at times. It's become so technologically focused and social media focused and platform focused that it doesn't stop. And I think it frazzles. I know that I get frazzled at the end of long work days because there's just so much coming at you all the time, and so much running and so much doing and so much being available. And it's very, very hard to hold your space, center yourself, and to create the space to think, to breathe, to respond to stuff when you are running so fast and when you are doing so much and when you are being pummeled with so much. So that's something that resonates with you. It's worth holding the other thing that I think is an interesting piece to hold as well is that we're also living in a world where so much that was off limits in the past is now up for discussion, right? So, whether you want to speak about different diversity, or the spectrum of diversity, whether we're speaking about gender, whether we're speaking about religion, whether we're speaking about age, whether we're speaking about education, whether we're speaking about race, whatever it might be, suddenly there's platforms and exposure and authorization to have so much going on that it's challenging, I mean, Emma, just looking at your name on the screen and the she and the her, that wasn't something that was on my radar screen when I was younger and at school. And I know that my son, who is finishing school this year, is definitely finding it more challenging because he doesn't know where to tread and where not to tread, and he doesn't want to step on toes, and he doesn't want to go through ice cracks. And I think that that's the world that we find ourselves in now, which is making us be hypervigilant and also uncertain and not authorizing ourselves to be authentic and to be natural because we don't want to trip up and we don't want to make mistakes. And so for me, I think the world that we're living in now, and whether we're talking about the world where I live in, which is a South African context, or the world where you living, which might be a UK context, or there might be somebody else in a different part of the world, we're living in a very complicated and complex system. And so for me, leading self, my own self-awareness, my ability to work with my mindset, my ability to realize potential. There's such a human condition and emotional, intelligent component to how can you be successful and navigate this complexity with more consciousness without it bogging you down. So that's a lot of the work that I do work in. It is around how do I lead myself through things. Candace mentioned, whether we're talking around how am I leading myself as a mother in a family or as a partner or as a friend or in this organization, or self-leadership reigns across both person and work, right? How am I leading others? Because again, it starts with me. So how am I working in the space between people, with others, my relationships, my navigating networks, my savviness around the political nature of organizations that we work in, that we all know exists. Organizations are made up of human beings for the moment until artificial intelligence and these robots take over the world. But for now, human beings work in organizations, and human beings are not simple characters. We're complex. We've got layers. We've got stuff. We've got load, right? So how can I, by working on myself and holding the space of myself and leading myself, the premise is if I'm good at doing that and if I'm more in tune with myself, I'm going to be that much better with other and with organization or with whole and system. And so that's the premise that we come from in the leadership masterclasses. And Candace speaking around well-being and resilience, again, two incredibly important facets of this, because the reality is we do need to be resilient. It's not an easy space. It's hard. It knocks us down. We have to get up. We get knocked down again. We have to wipe off the dust and get up again and keep going. And we need to keep ourselves well in the process. And I do think that, some of the stuff that I've spoken to, which is the non-stop being available, being online, being, doing, running, treading, whatever the words might be, it does play havoc with our headspace. My mother gave me two brilliant insights way back when, and I'm going to share them on this thing. The first thing is that the body keeps the score. And so you often find out that you do start to get sick, or you do start to take, you might burn out, you might be exhausted, depression, whatever it might be. The second you load your body with stuff and you don't release it and work with it, it just builds and builds and builds and builds until it's too hard for you to even think. That was the other thing she used to say to me. She would say, you have to breathe to think. But when you're so busy running, you're so busy doing, you're so busy treading, you're not breathing. And so you can't really think. And so the premise of this mini masterclass and the leadership masterclasses that we've designed is, how do you create a space for you to truly be in an authentic relationship with yourself, knowing yourself, understanding what makes yourself tick, so that you can be better at dealing with other people, so that you can confront yourself if something might not be working, and see if it's anything that you're doing before you bring other into the equation. So that's just a bit of an overview of this well-being and resilience for women. And of course, let's not negate the fact that women in business is different to a man in business. You know, we can talk about equality, we can talk about platforms, we can talk around fair pay, we can talk about grading, whatever you want to do. There has been a history in years gone by, and certainly in today, where certain things are infinitely harder for women to do. So again, I know for myself, as a mother of 3 boys, and they're not little anymore. One's going to be 10, one's 14, and one's 17. There's an expectation for you to hold the role in the world of work whilst you're holding the role in your world of mother, while you're holding the role in making sure that the house is looked after, and you're holding multiple roles the whole time and not wanting to drop them and trying to balance them. This myth of balance, by the way, which we have to debunk. It doesn't exist, balance. It doesn't. This lovely idea of I'm so balanced and I give, I'm balanced at work and I'm balanced. It isn't. There's always pulls, there's always pushes, there's always stressors that throw it out of whack. And so it's, how do I, as an individual, and this is the model that Candace speaks to, which I use very strongly in the leadership masterclasses and in my executive coaching, but how do I be in tune with myself? You've heard me say this: know myself, know what makes me tick, understand my deeply held beliefs, my personal values, understand my individual identity, and how do I own it? And the reason I'm saying that that's so important is, if I can own that, right, people will probably trust me, because if I'm showing up in a way that's congruent to who I am and how I tick, and people know that about me, they're probably going to trust me, right? But the interesting thing with this model is, who I am and how I roll, or how I tick, isn't a future thing. It's not even a today thing, even though it's about today. It's all rooted in the past. So it's my story. What story do I come into my organization with? What is my story? What has defined me? What's my DNA? What's my genetic and social imprint? Because that's a very integral part to how I show up in an organization, and what I bring that I stamp with authority, my sense of me, right? So that's the first part of this conversation that I would like you to hold. What makes me tick? Because the more in tune I am with it, and the more I spend time really getting in tune with myself, I'll be able to work with other people better. There's been a lot of research and experience that is testimony to it. And if you Google, love Google, leadership and characteristics of great leaders, the only thing that actually is common across most of those hits, which would be trillions, by the way, if you put it into your Google, is self-awareness. The more self-aware I am, the more effective I am out there or as a leader. And so that's the why do I exist? I mean, what makes me tick? Then the second part of the model that I want you to hold from a woman perspective in business and from a role perspective is, well, what is my role? Why do I exist, right? Why do I exist is usually in pursuit of something. So there is a bit of an aspirational quality to it. Why do I exist is because I need to do something. It's in pursuit of something that is future orientated versus the past of who I am, right? So if this is why I exist in an organization, I also need to ensure that I'm relevant in my organization. I can't be irrelevant, otherwise I'm not going to be seen, or the organization doesn't need me. So why do I exist in the business that I'm in? And whether you're talking about the role that you play, so I can say for myself, the organizational consultant, whether it talks around the mother role or the wife role or the daughter role, they're all roles I have on in my life. Why do I exist? Because there's expectations attached to them. And it's interesting because it's the expectation that the organization or others have of me But then back to the beginning piece about what makes me tick, it's also the expectations I have of myself on myself. And so it's a very interesting interplay of all these things that do start to play out. And there's a tension somewhat between the individual identity and the world at work, because it's also hard to be a mother, but to have to work and to have to juggle. And so that tension between my individual identity and how I want to be a mother, or how my mother was to me, or I didn't have a mother, so this is the way that I would like to be to my children, or whatever the story might be, there's always a tension between the past and the future. And then we move into the magic of the leadership process and the work that I do, which is the human condition, guys. We are all human beings and we suffer from it, right? So if I were to bottom line what human beings do, we're not perfect by any means. We make assumptions, human condition. We stereotype a lot. We biased. We try to simplify information by putting them into categories and boxes, and that facilitates all of the bias and the stereotyping. We're in habit. We need habit because habit's safe, by the way, right? So the more we've got things that are habit, or the more things are known, the safer we feel. So we kind of endeavor to do that, but then it's hard for us to break out of habit because we're in it. We have these brilliant things called defense mechanisms. So when I talk about defense mechanisms, I like to blame. It's easier. We push defense mechanisms, protect ourselves. It's like our armor, right? So I like to blame because it feels sucky to take accountability. I might project something onto somebody else because it wasn't me. It's all about you. I might deny stuff. I'm trying to think of other ones. Does anyone else want to help me here? My brain's shut down. Blame, denial, projection. We go outwards. We push things away from ourselves because we don't like the way it's making us feel. That's the leadership edge, everyone. That's just owning I'm human. How do I work with this human condition? Okay. And so that is this model, which is called the triangle of tensions. And it's just such a brilliant one for me. The magic in it is that the human condition is that we often get rooted and stuck in the past. And I mean, I want you to dig deep and own it. How many of us sit with load and baggage and lessons that have bitten us and hurt us and weariness? And you know how the anchor pulls you back and keeps you from launching forward? We've all got that, right? It's kind of called rooted in the past or stuck in the past. We all do that. We've also got this thing called goalpost and aspirational. We want to achieve, we want to aspire, we want to do better, we want to do more, we want to shoot for the goalposts, because that's also a human condition. Without future and aspiration, things are quite meaningless, right? We want to push ourselves to go there. But the challenge is, guys, and this is what I want you to hold very strongly in this woman in business, being well, being resilient. The problem with past and the problem with future, and it's not dissing them. We need past because we need lessons. We need future because we need aspiration. You actually can't do anything about it because it's happened and it hasn't happened yet, right? So where is the self-leadership, working with myself, working with others, really working with being a woman in business, managing the dynamic between home and business, managing the dynamic about being a working mom, managing the dynamic about being frustrated because actually I'm not being paid as much as somebody who might not be a woman, right? And again, tricky in this day and age because there's so many nuances when we speak about gender, right, these days. And it is scary, even as a psychologist and somebody who's worked in organizations for 23 years, I catch myself not being natural because I'm so scared I'm going to offend someone or say something wrong or do something that I shouldn't. So the magic of this model that we use in the leadership process, and that forms the whole journey in this leadership masterclass trajectory, is what do I want? How do I want to work with the now? How am I leaning into the now, in the present? How am I being more conscious in my mindset? How am I being more exponential in my seeing? How am I seeing the whole now? How am I looking at the bigger picture? How am I seeing human beings in terms of relationships? Because relationships Yes, you've built them in the past and you've got to nurture them for the future, but you've got to do that now. You can't just let them go. You've got to constantly work with it. And how do I thrive? And that is the magic of the space for me. It's how do I be more conscious, intentional, and deliberate right now, today, taking into account what I've learned in the past. So we're not going to negate it because that would just be foolish, right? There's lessons learned that are valid and valuable. But how do I hold that in the now? And also, because I am stepping off treadmills and because I'm tuning into or leaning into, I mean, there's lots of brilliant books that speaks from a woman perspective, whether you talk about Michelle Obama or Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook or Brene Brown. There are so many brilliant women that speak to how do you lean in. The leaning in happens today. The leaning in happens now. The leaning in happens with working at things in the here and now. But the challenge, and this is what we have to own, is that we're living in such a fast-paced, unprecedented, anxiety-provoking, unknown world that we sometimes just try so hard to keep up with it, that we're not seeing, that we're not listening, that we're not allowing ourselves to feel. We're not responding to our feelings, right? We're just going into thinking and firing mode. And so it's how can we work with ourselves? And again, back to that question up above that says, what do I want? What do I need? How am I choosing? Listen to my words. How am I choosing to work with this now? Because I've slowed down and because I'm seeing things, because I'm hearing things, because I'm feeling things, not only heart, but in my gut. And how do I do that? Because if I don't slow down, I'm not going to be able to do all of that and pick up this amazing information to work with right now. Because then we don't know what the future is going to look like. By picking up all of that stuff because you're a bit more tuned in, that future goalpost that you thought might be a completely different one or in a different direction. And so that becomes the space that we work in. And I want you to hold the challenges that you have as a woman in business or as a woman in life or as a woman in the 21st century, right? And again, with respect to whoever else is on this call who is not a woman, but how do I feel about what it's like for women in this day and age or in this here and now, right? And how do we work with it so that we can really show up in a way which maximizes our potential and gives us the opportunity to be the best versions of ourselves. So
Jackie,
I mean, I think, yeah.
I can just come in because I know I said to everybody to just wait and hold their questions, but I think this will lead quite nicely is when it comes to using this triangle and this model, can you think of some ways in which a leader in business, who occupies a leadership seat, maybe who is a woman, how would this come to be in reality, like as a practical application of this? So let's just say there is a challenge or some of the coaching you've done, maybe bring that in to make it to feel more real life, I think.
So I guess the first thing I would say to you, and again, I'm not going to be able to unpack this model in detail because it is a very lengthy process. But when I speak to individual identity, which is the what makes me tick, who am I, right? I'd like you guys to get in touch with somebody in the world or in your organizations who you think leads with their individual identity, that you know what makes them tick, you know who they are. You believe that this person is authentic, you believe that you know what you're going to get from this person, good or bad, but they very strongly lead with individual identity. Can any of you think of somebody in the world or somebody that you'd like to share that leads like this? So I'm going to give you an example just in the interest of time. Let's take Barack Obama, for example, or Donald Trump, for example. And I'm not going to go down any trajectory of who we support or didn't support or like or don't like, because that could be a challenging conversation. But the interesting thing with a Donald Trump, so let's use Donald Trump because I have lots of thoughts about him and his leadership. He's also quite on people's radar screen, whether you see him as the apprentice and on the TV, or you saw him as the president taking up that podium, or on Twitter where he would stamp his foot. But the thing with Donald Trump is you knew exactly, or you know exactly who he is. You know what makes him tick. He tells you, and whether you like it or you don't like it, it doesn't matter. You know what you're going to get from him. And because you know what you're going to get, he kind of feels safe. Does that make sense when I speak individual identity? Even in Elon Musk, for example, he declares it. You kind of know what you're going to get. And yes, you might radiate towards liking it because of your personal stuff, or you might be completely repelled by it. And that also does speak to deeply held beliefs and values, which is part of your individual identity. But when somebody is known, or you know what you're going to get, I can even think when I worked at this investment bank so many years ago, one of the MDs of the business was so scary at times when he would lose it, but also quite amazing at times. And I knew what I was going to get. So because I knew how he was and how he behaved with people, I kind of knew how to manage my relationship with him. Does that make sense? So that is the individual identity. The more people can know what makes you tick, and nobody's saying go and, I mean, I don't want to use any derogatory terms, but don't go and vomit in a bucket everything about yourself so that it completely sprays everyone. Nobody's saying that that's what individual identity is. There's stuff that doesn't belong at work, or that's your sacred stuff that you don't bring it. But if your colleagues, if your peers, if your manager, if your direct reports, if your clients have an understanding of who you are, your deeply held beliefs, your work ethic, how you roll, what hooks you, what you believe your vulnerabilities are, your personal story, where you came from, a little bit about you, your relationship with that person is probably going to be better because it's going to be trusted. It's going to be safer. And so that's the piece of the individual identity that I think, Candice, you're alluding to try and make it a little bit more practical. Versus, if we go into the future, somebody that I think certainly this group of people would really get. I mean, if I were to say to you, can you give me an example of, let's use a woman, because this is such a pertinent example for this. Let's give an example of somebody who is female in the world, past or present, who takes up or took up a role. And all you really got from that person was the role that they played, not who that person actually was. Who do you think that would be?
Most of the first ladies in the US, I would say.
Exactly. That's totally it. You almost don't know who they are. And closer to home would be the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth, right? And I don't know about all of you, and I've certainly watched The Crown on Netflix quite fascinatedly, and actually The Crown gave me so much empathy for the Queen, because I definitely over the years have thought, who is this woman? Like, what really makes her tick? She's all about the crown, how she should be. Listen to the language. What is expected of her? You're not allowed to share your personal beliefs. It's frowned upon if you. So you didn't have a clue who she was. And yes, maybe she showed a little bit when Diana passed away, and a lot of the vulnerability with William and Harry and all of that stuff that ensued, absolutely. And when COVID hit, she showed a little bit more humanity or herself. But she lived a very hard life of being the crown. For so many years, she couldn't cry when her corgi died. She couldn't celebrate and lose it at a party. She just had to be this very canned person, showing up because it was expected of her. And it's no different. We have expectations of things, and we have expectations of herself. And she would be a really good example of how she expected herself to be. She would hold herself in check because of her expectations of, these are my obligations to the crown. As well as, and of course, we're going into an interesting part of the royal family's journey, because you've now got William and Kate, who are injecting much more personality and person to this whole royal family story, because the times have moved and the world, or the population, is demanding it. So that's an example of the role, and how it is just about a role. And so how can you blend my individual identity with how I play the role and use it in the here and now? Does that make sense to you? And then a really good example about somebody who blends it very well, and I think Barack Obama is actually a really good example of that, or even Nelson Mandela, speaking as a South African. Where Nelson Mandela was so earth-shattering in the here and now was, yes, he was this person who endured the hardships of apartheid and what's his life in South Africa through him. He then became an underground terrorist trying to fight this injustice and was arrested and sent to jail for 27 years on Robben Island. Right? So that was part of his story. And then he was released from prison, and together with F.W. de Klerk, who became Nobel Prize winners, spoke around how do we move this thing forward, and became the first Black president of South Africa. And he was quite astonishing in how he did this, because he had the future of what he wanted, which is the aspiration, right? He had the canned role of his life story, his terrorism with the ANC, his arrest and Robben Island experience, and then his becoming the first president, and was beloved all over the world. And when you met this man, which I had the privilege to do, and I've got a colleague who I work with, whose son got to meet him because he was at school with Mandela's grandson, he wasn't the president and he wasn't the terrorist. He was just Madiba. And he was amazing in the way that he made you feel. He would say, "How are you? Don't call me Mr. Mandela. My name's Nelson." And he pulled you in the here and now. And so he kind of took his individual identity and the canned role that he had, and he was so deliberate with how he worked with it and responsible that he was beloved. And there was this ripple effect. So that's an example of working in the, just from a past, from a future, and what's expected perspective, and in the here and now, and how much power and influence, and I'm saying power, but not using the word as in bad power. I'm talking more around influence and impact, which as women today in the world of work, I think we really need to try and own our personal power, try and own our impact. It's not, and some people might crucify me for saying this, but it's not that men are bad and women are better. It's not saying that. I think we've just got different muscles that we're sometimes able to work in a different way that gives us an edge, And so it's, how do we own that? How do we take up the role, authorizing ourselves to impact and to influence and to bring the best that we can from our femaleness, and impact on our organizations, on our families, on our friends, because of that unique stake or stick or imprint that we've got. Does that help, Candace? Because as I said, it's a very detailed model.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, I think we've got 2 more minutes or a couple more minutes left. So I don't know if there's anything you want to do to wrap up, but I wanted to, is there, if there's anything more you want to discuss, Jackie?
So, I think it's covered it. These mini masterclasses are always challenging because time ticks very quickly. But what I'd like you to take from this is the very thing that we've spoken around. I think sometimes, and again, human condition, I think we sometimes live in the stories about the way things are, or the stories that we read about on social media, or what we think, might be happening. I think the magic in this process is really digging deep, owning our muscles that are good, owning what we do that is powerful, declaring that there are things that we could work on that could make us better. And sitting with that, really in the moment, catch ourselves, looking for the opportunities to imprint. I think that's what I would say from this journey, because we've all got that. We've all got leadership in us. We will bring our leadership in different forums and in different contexts, and around different groups, and we might show up in a different way with one group and another. That's very natural. But I think at the heart of this, Candace, that I'd like people to take away, whilst, by the way, making sure that I'm looking after myself from a well-being perspective, because we have to do that. We have to protect ourselves. But how do I authorize myself and get rid of that storyline about this is a man's world, or, there's a glass ceiling, or I'm not good enough, or I have to work harder because, which might be real, but also those messages internally deauthorize ourselves or scupper us, right? Or don't let us unleash our potential because we kind of keep ourselves down. And so for me, my challenge to everybody on this mini masterclass is how can we get in touch with the things we rate about ourselves and we back and have self-confidence about it, as well as the vulnerability about things that I could do better. And so how do I esteem myself? And with that at the heart of this all, how do I bring what I can and what's possible and imprint and impact? I think that's how I would close this out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Well, what I want to also maybe thank you very much for that, because so that is just a little nugget of one of the modules or one of the sessions. But maybe, Jackie, you can quickly talk a bit about the design of the masterclass. I suppose, or I left this lovely.
I love that picture, by the way, because I think I feel like that little person at the end today. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't think January actually, I think we skipped to February when we went into 2024, because I've got no recollection about January. It's gone.
Maybe we can talk through this. We can talk
exactly.
through this briefly
exactly.
and how it relates to the well-being and resilience.
Exactly. So look, the reality is, everybody, that we know that it's an exhausting, fast-paced, demanding world that we're living in. The problem is that actually nobody's going to look out for us. We've got to look out for ourselves. We've got to put in place things that are going to nurture ourselves and nourish ourselves. And whether you're talking about sleep or gym or music or a good glass of wine or a laugh or a movie or a good book, right? Or put that stupid cell phone on silent and put it in the drawer and shut the drawer. I think we have to be in integrity to ourselves first and foremost, before we move into the space between other, where we're in integrity to other people and we're in relationship with other people. I think we have to really be strong with how in relationship we are with ourselves. How do we know ourselves? How do we listen to our bodies when it's saying you're taking too much strain or you need more sleep? Or how are we nurturing and nourishing ourselves so that when we run, we're coming off a fuller box, or we're coming off a fuller jug and we're not depleted? And I will add my concerns. And I do think that this is post-COVID. I think the mental well-being of this world that we're living in is very scary in terms of how many people are taking strain, how many people are burning out, how many people are depressed, how many people are harming themselves because they feel like they don't know what to do anymore. And so when I saw the picture of these matches, it's how do I light the match? Because of course we need fire, right? We need fire to mobilize. We need fire to light stuff up. But how do I make sure that that match doesn't get completely cindered? And then again, powerful image, but hold the image that when it's gone, you've got that burnt out little matchstick at the end, and nothing you do is ever going to be forthcoming because you're coming off such a depleted and empty base.
Yeah. And I guess it's about knowing, like you say, yourself enough to know how are you moving down that trajectory, and when do you need to stop?
And when you confront yourself, by the way, and I'll say guilty as charged, because I know for a fact that I'm terrible at eating at mealtime. I've totally trashed my metabolism because I'm always running. I'm not getting enough sleep. I always park going to the gym or work because I've got everything else to do and I'm not coveting myself. I was reading a book that I think I left 3 weeks ago that I'd really like to know what's happening. It's that kind of stuff. How do you put yourself on the radar screen and make sure that you back yourself and you give yourself what you need so that you're coming from a place of more plenty when you are navigating the harder world of work or the harder life that we're living? It's just going to make us stronger.
Thank you. All right, so let's sort of just break for any questions that we've got from anyone on the chat, or if there's anyone that wants to put their hand up and talk, now it would be a good time to do that.
There is a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Nicole?
There is. So Maria's written here, thank you for a great session of golden nuggets. I've been trying since Christmas to be more intentional about protecting my time for reading and exercising, but it is slipping already. I'd like to ask, what practical steps do you take to protect those moments we take to breathe?
Maria, can I ask you to respond to your own question? And I'll tell you why after you do.
Right now, you put me on the spot.
I'm so sorry. I do these things a lot.
I think I've been trying to circle back, but it's only when I realize that X amount of time has passed. So for example, I got a box set of books that I'd been wanting to read for years, and it was given to me at Christmas. So I said, right, and it's a box set of 5 installments, and I've only read 2 of them. I should have finished them by now, long time ago. And it's only when I look at them that I realize, oh, you need to get back and put the time aside. And in short, I think I need to block the time in my diary, but somehow I haven't managed to do that yet.
And I am
So I don't
smiling.
know.
Yeah, I am smiling at what you're saying. And the reason I asked the question back of you is the premise that I come from in my coaching. It's a humanistic, as I said, I am a psychologist who is a coach. Humanistic psychology, and the premise that I work from is that you actually do know what you need to do for yourself. It's just sometimes there's so much going on that you don't have the space to access what you know, right? And it's exactly what you said, whether you're talking about, oh gosh, diary management. Do you know how many conversations I've had with people where you actually, when you interrogate the diary and how easy it is to fill up the diary with stuff, that we can just be so much more deliberate if we're just conscious about what is the purpose of this meeting. And I always tell the story. There was a colleague I used to work with, again, at that investment bank a long time ago. And she used to fascinate me because I always used to get through my day running from meeting to meeting and like trying to grab a cup of coffee while I was running, and always late for the meeting because the one ran over, and you guys are all nodding, the storyline. And she never used to. And then one day I said to Sharon, what are you doing that's making you look so calm? And you've always got your coffee hot, and you don't have your hair out of place, and you're eating your lunch at your desk. And she said, I put buffers in my diary between meetings. And I thought, gosh, that's genius. She literally put 15 or 30, and yes, of course, sometimes it's not possible, but she was rigorous with how she managed her diaries. And if anybody messed with her buffer and put a meeting over the buffer, she would push back, and they would probably change the meeting because they could, and she got her buffer. And so it's a silly example, but I think it's declaring, this is important to me. This is important to my well-being. The feeling of
more, just to interrupt, it's more than just declaring. I think it's about the doing.
Yeah.
I think it's about actually the action. And one of the sessions in the masterclass, in the main leadership masterclass that we run, is about habits that we can instill into our daily practice to be able to actually really become that person that we want to become. Because so often our day-to-day is filled up with bad habits that we've developed over time that we then sort of just ignore day after day after day. And the interesting part about some of the work we've done with leaders is around just those small little actions that then can kind of transcend into a massive change. Mm-hmm. It's actually not you need to be the change tomorrow. It's more around the little small habits and actions that you can put in place now that eventually become the change. Yeah. And I think that's the key.
And I think what you're saying is valid. And Maria, just hold what we're saying. I mean, it is very easy for us to just not go to the gym, right? Or to wake up that half an hour early and not go for a walk. And when you have that alarm clock go off, it's so easy to just switch it off and say, 30 more minutes, I'd rather sleep than walk. But that feeling after you do it, even if it was hard to do it, kind of makes you feel so good that you're happy you did it. And I think it's having to, and that's why I think the self-leadership is so important. As Candace spoke around, and there's a brilliant, brilliant book called Atomic Habits. It's really worth reading. When you confront the things that you're doing that is not serving yourself or that's scuppering you, I mean, that is this leadership journey. And it is a confronting yourself. It is a wagging your finger at yourself, because I know it's not hard for you to actually say, I'm not available, or to turn that phone off and to put it away and give yourself 30 or 45 minutes to sit on a couch and read a book, or it's just, and Candace said, it isn't around only being deliberate with yourself or confronting yourself, it's the doing, but it's the holding yourself, it's building your integrity muscle with yourself, I guess. It's like when I say I'm going to do something for me, I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to be out of integrity to myself if I don't. And then maybe I do it once and it feels so nice that I do it again and it feels so nice. And then suddenly I've shifted into a habit where, because it's making me feel good, I'm actually making it happen. And
Yeah.
I think it's that it's working with ourselves before we even bring other people into that space. And that's why at the heart of the self-leadership.
I've seen those results in people who it then becomes second nature once you keep incorporating those habits. I just want to, I'm conscious we've got 4 more minutes, Jackie, so sorry to interrupt you. But one of the things I wanted to quickly just sort of go through briefly is I suppose this is the masterclass sort of design, and maybe we can just talk about that for 2 more minutes.
So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a repeat on what we've been talking about, because as I said, everything that we've spoken around is based on this design of this masterclass. But, and Maria does speak to your point around leading self. The premise is that it starts with me. And so I do need to look at what makes me tick and my deeply held beliefs and the habits that I've got, and how I'm taking up my role personally and how I feel about things and my story. It's effectively my story leading myself, right? And getting to grips with it. And then it's moving into the space with the premise of the more in tune I am with me, the better I can deal with others. The leading others, it's interesting, the second block, because it's more one-on-one relationships versus team. So it's not me with my team. It's more me with my relationship one-on-one. So it would be my relationship with you, Vicky, or my relationship with you, Emma. And how is our relationship, and how do we work that relationship, and how do we maximize, how do we be in relationship with one another rather than out of relationship? Because the more in relationship we are, the easier it is to do things and to get things done, and it's not as hard. And then finally moving into the block of leading teams, which is a group of people, or leading a system or an organization. And you can be talking about a family system, you can talk about a work system. It's all the same, but it kind of starts with me and gets broader into one-on-one and other, and then you close it out, which it comes back to me and how am I leading and what am I imprinting. And so that really is the masterclass journey. And through this, anything that you're grappling with, what challenges, what dilemmas, what business imperatives, whatever there is on your radar screen has a space in terms of working with. Because the objective would be, and then it speaks to that triangle I spoke back to, and Maria, sorry to keep drawing on it, but you did ask such a great question. It's not going to help me in the future to contemplate if I read the 5 books. What am I doing right now to make sure that I'm reading them? Catch myself thinking like that. Because the human condition is we procrastinate, right? Another defense mechanism. We park it, we push it out, we defend, all of that good stuff. And it's how do we catch ourselves today, working with the things that we know are not serving us now, because that's where you have the power to shift. And I think that that's the overriding masterclass journey outcome. It's working today and then giving you tools that you can work with today to help you with the future, leveraging what I know about the past. I think that would be a summary of the masterclass slide that you just put on.
Thank you. Any questions before we close out from anyone on this? Nicole, anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Jen, your side, you just went off mute.
Yeah, it's not a question. I just wanted to say it sort of really resonated. I think you sort of mentioned about balance at the beginning, and I think it almost came back to balance again at the end. The sort of, if you can get the self-leadership piece right and set your own sort of boundaries and communicate that well with other people so they know how to make you tick, then maybe it's easier to get that balance across the different aspects of your life. Whereas if you're trying to serve others all the time and not really reflecting on your own needs, then I think it maybe all goes out the window. That was sort of the thought that I came to as you sort of wrapped up at the end there.
And that I'm really glad you've put that into this conversation, because that's exactly what it is. The other thing that's important is you can control what you can control, and there's things that you can't control, right? But what we do, and it again is a human condition, is we get into the downward spiral of, oh, I can't control it. Why bother? It is what it is. You know, all those messages we give ourselves. And it's how you're able to shift. So we spoke about exponential mindset and growth mindset. It's how do you shift that negative downward spiral, helpless feeling and say, okay, well, I can't control it, but what can I do to influence it? Or if I do something different, maybe I might impact something. Even if it isn't going to get impacted, I'm going to not be negative about it. I'm going to try something. And I think it just helps flip our mindset. And the second our mindset flips, things just tend to fall into place better because we don't get bogged down with that downward spiral. And so then we feel lighter. And so then we've got more energy to run at stuff. And so it becomes like this domino effect. And I think that that's something I'd love you to also hold. I love what you just said about the balance thing, because balance is a complete myth. It is a complete myth. And it's how do we work with it so that when we're at work, we're truly present at work. But when we're at home, we give ourselves permission to be present at home. That really is the balance solution. There's never going to be a good cake slicer that says, you know, we're going to cut it down the middle and that's work and that's, it doesn't exist. The world won't let it exist. So it's how do I work with myself? And I'd love you to take this from this course or this mini masterclass for me. I think when we're running so much and we're not breathing and we're treading, we become very reactive beings, right? Very reactive. If you jiggle around the letters of the word reactive, and we don't really have time to play, you can make a completely new word using every single letter. So if you've got reaction or reactive, if you jiggle those letters around, you get creation or creative, ironically. So I want you to hold that. Instead of being reactive or reacting or react or just reacting to stuff, how do you create the space to truly create, right? There's meaning in that. There's power in that. And so the here and now and the present is, because I'm doing that, how am I responding to what's going on? How am I responding to things that don't feel good? How am I responding to things that are feeling good? And how, because I'm tuned in now, is it going to impact on my story?
Thank you.
And my journey.
Okay. Thank you, Jackie. All right, well, we run out of time and I'm conscious we're a few minutes over, so I'm going to end that now. So I just wanted to say thank you all for being here and participating and registering. And if there's any more information you need, or if there's any more insights that you want from us, then we will be holding these mini masterclasses more regularly, different topics, obviously, and maybe different nuggets. So definitely keep us on your radar. And thank you all for joining, and have a lovely day forward.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Go well.
Thank
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.